All right, welcome back, everybody, to another week of Track Talk as we kick it off here with Eric Alwan, the voice of Sunland Park Racetrack and Casino. And man, Eric, I love upsets. And I'll tell you what, if we talk about what happened last Saturday, it was upset city, especially for Brooks Legacy in that Lou Wooten and Sidney Valentini handicap. I'm telling you, we've seen some big upsets here through the first few weekends of live racing, haven't we?
Couldn't pick that horse in a billion years, Steve. I could look at that form over and over and over again. But that's the thing about racing. Hope springs eternal. Long shots do win, and favorites only win a third of the time at best. So there's all that whole probability opens up. I don't know what happened with Mean Moonflash in the race. She didn't seem to really fire her A game. Fancy sort of did, but here comes Brooks Legacy down the center of the track, and there were those two grays battling it out. It did make for an exciting finish to the Lou Wooten Sidney Valentini handicap, but it's all part of the game. It's never over till it's over. Kind of like that playoff game from a few days ago, the Chargers blowing the big lead.
Oh,
Kind of like
right.
that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Hey, by the way, I'm going to ask you this question because you said you would never pick this horse in a million years. Yet this horse has now won 3 in a row. So when the horse had won its 2 races prior to this, was the competition just not good enough to where you expected this horse, Brooks Legacy, to come in the winner's circle?
That's a great question. For those of us that follow the game real intently, when you win a maiden race, okay, that's a start, So that's what that horse did. It beat non-winners. And then it did do this. It did beat winners subsequently at Zia, but by no means had it ever run against anything as fast as what we saw in those mares that had made $500,000, big money like that. But it does go to show that a rising upstart can get sharp and shock the world. And she wasn't in front. She was a length back, and she closed and won, and that's also remarkable in a short quarter-horse race. That was was it only 400 yards? Yeah, 400 yards.
What can you tell me about Armando Alamos, the trainer of the horse, as well as Oscar Diaz, the owner of Brooks Legacy?
Not too much, Steve. I think I've caught his name at Albuquerque some and called some of his winners. So he did sort of grab my attention. But man, that was a huge win. And I don't know the owner all that well yet, but they obviously know what they're doing, and they've got some good horses. And Armando can train, because I've seen him win plenty of maidens and allowance races. So he's a kind of an up and comer there.
So this is the kind of race that if you like long shots, and let's just say you played the exacta with Brooks Legacy and Fancy, you did very, very well for yourself, didn't you?
Gosh, I don't quite remember the price, Steve, but I'm sure it was like 150, 200 to 1 for a $1 ticket. You bet that much. You knock a favorite out like that, sure does. To be honest with you, I was shocked that the filly was only 15 to 1. I mean, I thought it would have been even higher. But it was exciting to call, because I could tell that she was revved up in the last 100 yards and that she was going to go by Fancy. And it made for some excitement there.
I'll tell you what, Eric, that exacta paid over $207. Very impressive. Very impressive.
Deserved it.
All right, let's talk about Mama Was a Rocket. That was the Sunday winner in the La Senora Stakes. Now, this is really interesting. First career stakes win for the horse. But when you realize that this is a Todd Fincher horse, then clearly you get excited, because we've talked about Todd so many times over the years. Whenever he has a horse in a major stakes race, no matter what the odds are, you have to take it seriously.
And our good friends, who you know well, Kirk and Judy Robeson of El Paso, probably the most successful local ownership group I've ever seen, and has been able to win at the national level with Jackie's Warrior. This is a horse that, hell, I bet on her. I bet on her when she won her debut at Ruidoso. she really impressed me. Why did I like her? Because she was out of a mare that has already produced some stakes winners. I think she was the mama. She's out of the mama that produced Diabolical Ruler, who was another very precocious 2-year-old for the Robesons years back. And I like to do that. I think that sometimes the best play in racing is the first time outers, because not everybody is willing or capable to do the research that's necessary to know if the breeding's there or not. So this horse impressed me back in the summer, but you know what? Then she sort of tailed off. They put her in the trials and futurities at Ruidoso for the thoroughbreds, and she didn't quite pop. She was most lately seen at Zia, and there was some improvement. She was a good third, I think, in a stakes race, beating a length. And then she was only beaten about a head in a very tough allowance. So you had to use her in the mix. I'm sure that's why I think she was 2-1.
Mm-hmm.
She might not have been quite the favorite, but she was close to being the favorite. And she's by that great stud, Diabolical. She looked great coming out onto the racetrack. But it's interesting how she won it, Steve. She was headed by Hannah's High Life on the far turn, where usually races are won and lost. And I thought was behind by almost a length. And Hannah's High Life was just cruising and not even being asked. And usually outside horses tend to sort of dominate the ones that are on the inside. Not in this case. That mama was a rocket, kicked back into gear and put away Hannah's High Life and kept driving and still won it. And of course, with Todd Fincher of training, you always got to be on the alert. He had 3 in the race. And I will mention this name for you, Steve, Felipe Valdez.
What can you tell me about him, Eric? What can you tell me about Felipe?
Great rider that Todd's using. And he used Felipe on one of his up-and-coming 3-year-old male horses that I think is a New Mexico bred, that's Steal the Trap. Remember that name, because I think Stealing the Trap might be good enough to compete against open horses in our series of races that lead up to the Sunland Derby. And if not, I think he's going to run on Sunland Derby Day in that New Mexico Breeders' Derby that's worth $250,000. He's that good. He's got a big, long stride on him. And the day that he won, Santa Anita had shut down because of all the flooding and everything. And all FanDuel TV, AKA TVG, had to show was Sunland. I was all over the place. Sunland was all over the place. And even they noted how impressive this New Mexico bred for Todd looks. So it's so amazing how many horses Todd has, how deep his barn is. And I was so glad to see Kirk Robeson in the winner's circle too. He was here to cheer on. Mama was a rocket. And then that name, that tells you everything you know. The mama was a rocket and she's produced rockets. So I was happy for Kirk and Judy.
As far as Hannah's High Life, you mentioned that horse earlier. Francisco Amperon rode the horse. Dueling with Mama was a rocket, but did Hannah's High Life just fade down the stretch?
Well, because of HISA and all the federal rules that we have to abide by, no LASIK's allowed. It's another little wrinkle you got to deal with now. I think that was a factor. However, no one was allowed to use LASIKs. So Hannah's is usually a LASIK user, as they all are. But I guess without LASIKs, Mama was a rocket showed that she just had more determination than Hannah's High Life. I don't know, the particulars. Like, did Hannah's High Life bleed or not? I don't know.
Yeah.
But she ran well, but she sure did look like her heart was broken in the final furlong.
Meanwhile, a Crossfire Cowgirl with Alfredo Juarez Jr. gets the second place finish in this one. So with all the talk about Hannah's High Life and Mama was a rocket, here comes one of the great riders of Sunland. And again, a horse that was able to close right down the center and take the place.
Mm-hmm. That's what makes wagering exotically. When I say that term exotically, it means all the other bets besides win, place, and show. Because when you're betting exotics, you want to know who's going to be first and second and third if you try the trifectas, or fourth if you try the supers. But whenever a horse is going for the win, and of course they all are going for the win, and then she sort of gets discouraged, you can't really count on her just being second. And that's what happened with Hannah's High Life. She relinquished second in the final strides, and it made for an all Todd Fincher exacta. that I think paid $25 for 2, which is a great price for Todd in such a short field.
That's a great point to bring up. Meanwhile, I got to ask you this question. Okay. So in the old days, it was 2-1, 3-1, 4-1. Now, Mama Was a Rocket finished 2.70 to 1. When did we start going to decimal points on the odds, Eric?
Oh, that's just the way that the Equibase people kind of narrow it all the way down to. When you're looking at the tote board, Steve, they don't do it that way. They just give you the price that you would get if your horse wins. But they've been going down to the dime. That's what we go down to in New Mexico. New York goes down to the nickel.
Wow.
And get this, Kentucky goes down to the penny, which is kind of a good thing because it allows horses to pay $2.19 rather than $2.10, or it could pay $4.49. So for a big player that's a lot of money, you might get 19 cents more per dollar than the way things used to be. But we're still down to the dime. And that's only if it's a big show bet and something pays $2.10. On everything else, it's an increment of 20 cents.
Makes a lot of sense. Eric Alwan with us here on Track Talk this week as we continue. So those were the big races from this past weekend. Now, we have live racing all week, Tuesdays and as well as Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And as we mentioned earlier, Sunday and Tuesday are thoroughbred races. Friday, Saturday are the quarters. Now, this week, Eric, we're talking about weather in the 40s and the 50s. Now, we could have some rain like today. We could have just cool weather. How does the cooler temps affect live racing and the horses? How do they respond versus maybe going up to the 60s, the 70s, and later on the 80s when we had that later in the year?
They're amazing animals, Steve. They are cold weather animals, and they actually do grow a winter coat of fur, believe it or not. Sometimes you'll see horses come out in the winter that look like they're have a dark shade and then a lighter shade. And that's because they've been shaved so that their woolly coat, so to speak, they won't get too sweaty and then catch a cold. But they really do like cold weather. And do you remember Sunday's weather in El Paso? I mean, it was blowing 40, 50 miles an hour, right? Yep. And we ran. I got to give a tip of the cap to the brave jockeys, and we kept running, and the horses still ran very formful. What weather does is it changes the dynamic of a horse race. You see, if there's lots of wind down the backstretch that the front runners are facing, it tends to wear them out quicker and allows the closers to win. When it rains like today and there's no wind, front runners benefit because they get the front runners don't get splashed with the mud. And the horses that are in the back and waiting to make their moves kind of get hit with lots of mud, and that's very discouraging. So usually speed holds there. But as long as it's not too icy or unsafe, yeah, the horses really do love it. Driving in today, there was a lot of rain. We could have an off track, but our trackman's so good. What he will do to the surface is remember when you brought Joel out and you guys came to the press conference and I showed you that 8 to 10 inch cushion of soft dirt? Well, they'll compact it down a little bit so that the water will drain off. That's what's called sealing a racetrack. That's being done as we speak right now, so that it doesn't get so overly muddy.
Makes a lot of sense.
But they're amazing creatures. They like cold weather, and we're lucky here in the Southwest, right? I mean, we don't run in freezing temperatures maybe once a year. It can happen, yes. I've seen races in the snow here, but we're pretty lucky, and that's why Sunland has always occupied this niche of being the only track in New Mexico during the winter months.
Eric, we've flown by another week of Track Talk. Again, live racing 12:25 Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. NFL playoffs as well. Just a lot of good things happening around. And hey, enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to doing it right back with you next week, Eric.
You're the best. Appreciate it.
Eric Alwan, folks, as we continue here on Track